and is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. If you're registered to speak at today's meeting, please listen for me to call your name. I will call speakers in the order they appear on my list. The list of speakers can be viewed online by visiting the Toronto Preservation Board link at toronto.ca/council and clicking the speakers box for today's meeting. Members, the City Clerk has provided all agenda materials on toronto.ca/council. As a reminder, please submit and approve your motions by email. Staff are available at hertpb@toronto.ca to help with motion. Now, are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? If you do have an interest, please raise your hand or unmute your mic and indicate the item number and the nature of the interest. Anybody? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed. Okay, may I have a motion to confirm the minutes from our last meeting on November 6, 2023? Julia, fine. All those in favor? So that's carried. So at this time, this is my last meeting with Preservation Board, and I would just like to thank all of you. You've been a fantastic board to work with. You're just a great team. And I must say, I have learned so much from you. Your skills complement each other so well on different issues, the different angles that you come at things. And as I always say, I look at the architectural historians dreaming of being able to read architectural drawings and pick up issues as fast as you can. The other people, of course, I'd like to thank are Matthew and Fortis, our clerks, who keep me on the straight and narrow. And unfortunately, because we've been meeting on video, Matthew hasn't been able to do what his predecessor did, which is kick me when I make a mistake. But I do get a fast email. And of course, it's been fantastic dealing with staff and learning a bit more about how things come together and being able to ask questions. And I have a huge appreciation for the amount of work that goes into all of these reports. So thank you all very much. And now let's get on with this meeting. So the first item we're going to review the agenda is PB 12.1, 66 Charles Street East, Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There are speakers on this item, so I will hold it down. The next item is PB 12.2, 171 Lowther Avenue, Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. We have no speakers. It's a staff report with recommendations, and there is also a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item down? Adam, okay. The next item is PB 12.3, 2111 Yonge Street, Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a staff report with recommendations, and there is also a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item? Alex, okay. Next item is PB 12.4, 309 Cherry Street. Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a staff report with recommendations, and there is also a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item down? Adam? Okay, the next item is PB 12.5. 47, 49, 51, 53, 55, 57, 59, 63, 65 Huntley Street, 137911 Selby Street, 1618 Linden Street, alterations to designated heritage properties, 47 Huntley Street, which also has the address to Linden Street, demolition on a heritage property, authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There is a staff report with recommendations, and there is also a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. Would anyone like to hold this item? I hope there's a good reason. Okay.
There is, Madam Chair.
Okay. The next item is PB 12.6, 69 Young Street and 3 King Street East, alterations to a designated heritage property and authority to enter into heritage easement agreement. There is a public speaker on this item, and so I will hold it down. And the next item is PB 12.7, 600 King Street West, alterations to a heritage property, demolition of a building, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. There's speakers on this item, so I will hold it down. And the next item is PB 12.8, designation of the Cabbagetown Southwest Heritage Conservation District under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. There is a staff report with recommendations, and there is also a presentation from Heritage Planning staff available if the board would like to hear the presentation. I would like to hold that one down. That's mine. So there. Okay. So we, at this point, can go back to PB 12.1. I just have to check one thing. Okay. There is an email. Make sure it's nothing. Okay. That is a thing. Yeah. Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've been informed that we have a speaker on item 5. I believe they registered this morning. So it's currently being held, which is fine. But we'll need to hear a speaker on item 5.
Okay. So I had one speaker already.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess you'll give me the name of that speaker when we hit item 5.
Yes. Yeah. I'll send that over to you.
Okie dokie. Okay. So the first item is PB 12.1, 66 Charles Street East, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So we'll begin with the staff presentation, then go to our outside speaker and ask them questions, and then come back to staff.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Who's
Wonderful.
Presenting?
I'm Patrick Brown. I'm with.
Oh, you finally get to present something, Patrick.
Yes, it's been some time.
Yes.
So I'm Patrick Brown. I'm the Heritage Planner on the Policy and Research team, and I will be presenting on PB 12.1, 66 Charles Street, Notice of Intention to Designate a Property under Part 5, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The property is located on the north side of Charles Street, to the west of Charles Street in the Church Wellesley neighborhood, comprised of a rectangular 2.5-story residential structure in the Second Empire style. It forms part of a group of late 19th and early 20th century residential buildings that anchor the northwest corner of Church Street and Charles Street East. Next slide, please. The property has physical design value as a representative example of a late 19th century residence designed in the Second Empire style, featuring a mansard roof with polychromatic slate shingles, punctuated by dormers framed by decorative wooden brackets and fluted pilasters. This decorative woodwork is carried through in the cornice brackets and front porch. Originally constructed as a rough-cast wood frame structure in 1872, it was remodeled in 1886 by developer Arthur Coleman, who is responsible for building the adjacent Second Empire style semi-detached residences at 6264 Charles Street East in 1884. The property also has historical value for its direct association with noted cartoonist journalist, poet, and lecturer John Wilson Bengow, who resided at the property between 1904 and 1910. Declared a National Historic Person by the Government of Canada in 1938, a commemorative plaque was installed at the property in 1983 by Parks Canada. Next slide, please. The property has contextual value for its role in maintaining and supporting the historic character of the northwest corner of Church Street and Charles Street East, together with the adjacent designated properties at 6264 Charles Street East to the west and 628 and 634, 636 Church Street to the east. It forms part of a collection of late 19th and early 20th century residential buildings that anchor the corner. The property is also visually and historically linked to the neighboring properties at 6264 Charles Street East, which feature similar designs, including mansard roof with polychromatic slate shingles, dormers, brick facades with stone lintels, and decorative woodwork in the dormers, brackets, and front porches. The property was listed on the city's Heritage Register on March 15, 1974. Following research and evaluation, it merits designation for its physical design, historical, associative, and contextual value. Thank you. Oh,
Sorry, I'd muted myself. Phil, you are the speaker. Phil Goldsmith is the speaker on this item. There you are. You have 5 minutes.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I really don't have a presentation to make. It seemed I had to register as a speaker to be here amongst you all this morning, virtually. So I'm really only here to answer questions. We have no objections to the designation of the property.
Okay, does anyone have any questions for Phil? That was easy. Okay, thanks, Phil.
All right. Have a good day,
Okay.
everyone. Thank you.
Okay, does anyone have any questions of staff? Yes, Adam?
So thank you, Patrick, for that great presentation. You noted that the rest of the block was designated previously, so that prompted me to look into why this one was just listed. And it turns out there's a forthcoming, and I know this is not for intention to designate report, but there is a redevelopment application coming in the works for a 9-story building on this site. So on both sides, you have those two 50-story towers. I'm just wondering, we're obviously going to see an alterations to a designated property in the future, but in the front yard, there's that federal plaque about Bengow. I'm just wondering if that's been identified as a heritage attribute. There's been an issue in the past with people removing those plaques during various development projects and they go missing or they are not reinstalled. Is there a precedent for us designating or identifying a National Historic Person plaque as a heritage attribute within the municipal register within the Ontario Heritage Act?
I am just quickly checking the report to.
For context, there was a Heritage Toronto plaque on the building immediately to the west of this that was removed 5-6 years ago. They don't know where it went, and those are very expensive to replace.
I
So
see.
if we can
Mary,
identify
and
this
I
as
see-
an attribute, then it would be really good to include it in that way. Moving forward, is actually identified within that kind of framework for this redevelopment project.
Okay, I see both Mary and Tamara.
I'll let Tamara answer this, and I'll
Oh.
chip in if I need to.
Right. The recognition is done through the description of the property in the Statement of Cultural Heritage Value. So we note that there is a plaque, but it in itself is not an attribute that conveys the cultural heritage value itself. Yeah.
So what steps can be taken to prevent that being lost?
You know, we should have had Phil answer this question because he has the
There's Phil, he's
oversight
still
of the project.
Yeah.
I can do unprecedented things. It's my last meeting. You can
Yeah,
ask him.
I'll make sure it is preserved, and I'll identify it as an item to be preserved in the conservation plan when I get to it.
Thank you.
Okay, super.
Much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Phil. Okay, are there any other questions of staff? Barbara?
Yeah, I just want to note that it is listed in the heritage attributes under historical associative value. The plaque is listed.
Yeah, Patrick just brought that to our attention, so there you go. It is possible, and we've done it.
That's wonderful. Hopefully we'll lose less of the plaques.
That would be good. between that and people taking them for metal.
Yep.
Anyone else have a question of staff? Okay, any discussion among us? Nope. So I have a report before us. Can I have a motion to adopt? Barbara, all in favor? Done. Okay. So PB 12.2, 171 Lowther Avenue, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Here to present is?
It's me again.
Okay.
So, yes, I'll be presenting. It's Patrick Brown, and I'll be presenting.
You're making up for lost time.
Yes, well, I have 3 todays.
Okay.
Yes, I'll be presenting on PB 12.2, 171 Lowther, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The property is located mid-block on the south side of Lowther Avenue between Walmer Road and Dalton Road in the West Annex neighborhood. Comprised of a rectangular 3-story house form building constructed between 1901 and 1902, it was converted to apartments in 1943 while continuing to maintain its exterior appearance as a single-family residence. Next slide, please. The property has physical design value as a representative example of an early 20th century residential structure, blending elements of the Queen Anne Revival and Edwardian classical styles. The exuberance of the Queen Anne style, found in the substantial cross-gable roofline, Dutch gables, oriel and Œil de Bœuf windows, is complemented by the simple massing and restrained brickwork of the Edwardian classical style. Next slide, please. The property has contextual value for its role in maintaining and supporting the historic character of the West Annex neighborhood. The property is also historically linked to its surroundings as part of the early development of the West Annex, with a similar material palette to the Langley and Burke designed Walmer Road Baptist Church, located directly across the street, which was constructed between 1889 and 1913 and was designated in September 2023. The property was listed on the city's Heritage Register on July 19, 2023, following its identification in the West Annex Phase 2 Historical Context Statement and Heritage Survey Project in 2022. Following research and evaluation, it merits designation for its physical design and contextual value. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we don't have outside speakers. Adam, you held this item. What would you like to know?
So we've seen this property several times at recent meetings. I'm just wondering if staff might be able to speak to what's going on with the appeal process and to identify. It's my understanding that staff have followed the protocols exactly as they should. That was listed prior to development application coming in. The owner is still appealing. There's that letter from the owner that everyone received this morning from the clerks. I'm just wondering if staff could speak to the revised guidelines for how this should operate when it comes to this type of listing or designation with the new legislation. Using this as a case example, for example.
Hey, Mary?
Hi, good morning. So your question is just about the difference, what we do differently now or what happens?
Yep, it's my understanding staff have followed the protocols exactly as they should have with how to get this onto the Heritage Register, and the owner is still appealing, the owner is still objecting to that?
Yes, and that is not
what's different
uncommon.
now versus then, yeah.
Oh, it's a 2-step process now. So there's actually more opportunity for owners to, there's a step in the middle where owners can object. And that objection is then considered. And so, which means we take the designation back through the system and we acknowledge that there has been an objection and there's an opportunity for a second review, for a second consideration of council. Anything can happen. We get new information. It's a little bit cumbersome having a little bit more red tape around it, and yet it opens up an opportunity for dialogue, which I think is really important. So then once that objection is considered, we have a specified number of days to take it back to council. So yeah, you can conceivably see it even 4 times, because then At the point that it goes to council and we issue the notice of intention to designate, that is when there's an objection to the bylaw. So it was functionally different. In essence, it's somewhat the same, except we go back through the process several times. And we have had points where legitimate things have come up, right? And so it is good. We've made, we tinker and if we have to, but otherwise, it's generally they've been remaining the same through the process. So does that make sense, Adam?
Yep. Thank you, Mary. And I'm a bit baffled by why this owner in particular keeps appealing it, because my understanding they want to preserve this particular building within their redevelopment plans anyways. So, but thank you. I do appreciate you explaining that. It's very much appreciated.
Sure. My pleasure.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? Okay. Seeing none, any discussion amongst us? Okay, I have a motion. I'll make a motion to adopt. All in favor? Okay, it's carried. Okay, the next item is PB 12.3, 2111 Yonge Street, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Who is presenting?
Madam Speaker, I'll be presenting again.
Oh, yes, it's you. Okay.
Yes, so again, my name is Patrick Brown, and I'll be presenting on item PB 12.3, 2111 Yonge Street, notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide, please. The property is located at the southeast corner of Yonge Street and Hillsdale Avenue East, 2 blocks south of Eglinton Avenue in the Davisville neighborhood. Comprised of a rectangular 2-story mixed-use building constructed between 1906 and 1910, it features ground floor commercial with residential above. A 2-story rear addition constructed between 1924 and 1940 has not been identified as a heritage attribute. The property, next slide, please. The property has design physical value as a representative example of a corner mixed-use Main Street commercial property with a unified 2-story commercial storefront, originally designed to appear as a single story wrapping around the corner. The building's plain brickwork with pressed metal cornice, parapet, and storefront cornice are characteristic of the Main Street commercial architecture found in Toronto's early 20th century suburbs. Next slide, please. The property has contextual value for its role in defining, maintaining, and supporting the historic character of Yonge Street between Belsize Road and Hillsdale Avenue East. The property is also physically, functionally, and historically linked to its surroundings as part of the early 20th century commercial development of Yonge Street in Davisville, the Davisville neighborhood, with similar massing, material palette, and corner treatment as can be found in the Benjamin Brown design properties at 2100 to 2106 Yonge Street across the road, which were constructed between 1936 and 1938 and were designated in 2020. The property was listed on the city's Heritage Register on October 2nd, 2017, after being identified by city staff as having potential cultural heritage value following the completion of the Midtown and Focus Cultural Heritage Resource Assessment Report in March 2017. Following research and evaluation, it merits designation for its physical design and contextual value. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Okay, do we have, Alex, you held this. Do you have questions? You're muted, Alex.
And I will now turn off my video. So hopefully my sound is a little bit better.
Your sound is perfect now.
Okay, maybe I can turn on my video, but I'll see. Anyway, I guess first of all, a general sort of comment. The preservation of Main Street streetscapes, commercial streetscapes. I'm very disappointed in this case that only the one building is considered worthy of designation. As you could see in the picture, this is a long block, and I believe there's something like 10 or 12 properties identified as having potential heritage value. And to have one rather small store at the north end is the only one to be preserved in this entire development, I'm really very disappointed. And just to talk about these main streets in general, right across the street, I think Patrick referred to the Benjamin Brown Design Building, and Mary several years ago when this came up, touted it as an example of good Main Street retention, streetscape retention, because I think there are 2 buildings retained and the new building is currently being built. But in this case, to have just one small building at the corner for this whole almost entire block seems inadequate. And if you go up Yonge Street farther, you have the Capitol Theatre, where the facade is being retained. And just south of that, the Bank of Montreal building was unfortunately torn down, but the 2 other buildings, the facades are being retained. So as someone said, you know, these buildings, some of these buildings along commercial streets in Midtown are not spectacular. They don't have fancy polychromatic brick and lovely mansard roofs and bay and gables, but they do form a pretty coherent streetscape, which I think is in danger of disappearing over on Mount Pleasant, for example, and lots of main streets where you have typically the fine-grained commercial with apartments above. So that's a general comment. Specifically regarding this development, the property to the south, and I'm afraid I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you saw it in the pictures. It's a 3-story walk-up apartment complex with stores at ground level. And the interesting thing to me is that in the huge ERA Heritage HIA report, this was identified as having some contextual value. But most of the report is about this building is spent complaining that if the building were to be retained, it would cause problems with such things as ceiling heights and various other things. In other words, things that are problems for the developer. So I have a feeling that, you know, the HIA report is not entirely fair to the building because of while admitting it has got value, it then goes on to say why it shouldn't be retained. But basically, these are development concerns. And we've got lots of examples. I mean, we've got ones today on Selby and et cetera, where you can maintain the facades and somehow cope with building behind the building. And I would really like to recommend that this building be considered for heritage status and be retained in this development. I'm not quite sure how we go about that at this point, whether an additional motion is required or further study or whatever. So I think Jeff has some comments too to make about the process.
Okay, let's get an answer to this question first, and then Jeff, if you want to put up your hand after. So who can answer this question, please, on staff?
I probably will be a group approach, and I'll start by saying that currently I mean, you know this, we are considering one designation and the rest of them remain listed. And there is a, yes, discussion happening about a development there. And as far as I'm hearing the board's concerns, and I think the best thing we can do is try to figure out the best way for you to express the concern in the right place, because I realize the discussion is triggered by this individual designation, but we don't want to mix this individual designation up with the other things. You know, as the board knows, we are working really hard to reconcile development with our main streets and working within a larger context. So because we have this 2-part system now where we're designating earlier, which is better, it becomes more obvious which ones are becoming more vulnerable. And perhaps that is something we also need to talk to the panel about. So I'm loath to get into the issues of the development. I'm going to let Tamara and Patrick speak to the value of the street. and the individual buildings in the process that has been happening as we work through what we consider that we can defend at the OLT. Tamara?
There she is.
So our greatest challenge with the Main Street commercial properties with the Midtown in focus has been, as Mary says, they are listed, but it has become a case by case. And in part, what will be the integrity of the entire commercial row, which sometimes is not the complete row that we have. And you'll note, as you said, Alex, that there are times when we are doing the full designation itself. I'm not one to fall into the argument that these are just fabric buildings, and from an urban design point of view, you just keep the ornamental building on the corner. That's not my professional opinion. I do believe that it's always a collection of buildings and the streetscapes itself. In this circumstance, for us to look at it, as Mary was also saying, the recommendation at this point is for this corner building. This is the one that we are confident on, that meets the criteria now that we have, the 2 or more criteria for designation. We bring these reports to the board to hear your perspective and views on that. So I guess I would say that if you have new information or you believe that there's a perspective that we're not clearly articulating in this, I welcome your opinion. Honestly, this is at times, as I say, a case by case.
Alex?
Well, yes, thank you. I certainly think that in this case, the retention of simply the one building is as opposed to a longer stretch of that development area is not good for preservation of the streetscape, obviously. I found it rather sad that out of, I think it was 10 or 12 potentially heritage deserving properties, only one was picked. And frankly, I don't think it's a spectacular building either. And Mary spoke to the general problem, and I appreciate that. I think there is going to be an ongoing problem maybe more in Midtown and, well, lots of areas in Toronto where there are these streetscapes, and how do you preserve them when the buildings are not in themselves, spectacular. Maybe we need a new designation for the type of architecture, sort of Midtown or commercial walk-up or something, but it seems to me we've got a bit stuck in terms of building typology back in the Victorian and Edwardian era. And of course, then we get streamline and art moderne and stuff like that. But for this more common type of architecture, vernacular, something or other, perhaps is a solution. I don't know. Anyway, thanks for your comments.
Okay. Jeff, did you have anything to add? And then Robert?
Are you into discussion now, or
no, asking questions?
Well, I don't have another question. Well, I guess my question would be, what is the process for dealing, like as Alex enunciated, you pulled one building forward, but there's another 9 there of the original multiple listing exercise, which was done, whatever, 3 or 4 years ago. Like, what is the process to report on publicly on multiple listing projects, and where you're going forward with one and not the others? I mean, it seems to me there's a deficiency there in terms of transparency around the process.
Jeff, I don't, well, deficiency. Here's what I think. I think given the situation that we find ourselves with heritage preservation in this city, where we know that there's a strong and important lens on housing, and we believe that heritage and housing are hand in hand. But that does not mean that there isn't a certain amount of pressure brought to bear on our conversations. That the fact that there is no moment where there's a kind of galvanized perspective of the community while the application is formulating, that's actually really helpful to us. So where you feel a lack of transparency, we actually, that's not an intentional lack of transparency. That's sort of the situation we're handed. I think what we need to do is, particularly now that we have a new TEY panel and all the panels are up on their feet and we get going in the new year with the presentation and all of that, we coalesce. I think we could probably build a better system where when these decisions are happening, there is an input that the panels at minimum have into the development process, so that it's not just about the listing or the designation. That community concern at the time that applications are being created is very helpful to us, because we didn't list those properties because we thought they didn't have value. We feel very strongly about Main Streets, and this is where we're arriving on this particular property. But I think the questions you're raising are important, and they can inform new ways of feeding into the application process to ensure that these perspectives are present at the time. The other thing you want to keep in mind, just to go sideways, still sideways even further, is that as we are reviewing the 4,000 odd properties that are listed, of which there are, I think, maybe 1,000 that are kind of representative of from the multiple listing era. Can't remember. Paul Macca would know exactly. This is an important consideration as well, because when we don't have a register that lives for a long time, we have to look at questions of different values of typologies and the relationship of the commercial and Main Street properties to the neighborhood in behind and the historic importance of that. So I would also urge everyone to bring up these thoughts as we're doing that bit of consultation as well, because that is something we're considering in terms of our priority lens. Sorry, that was many tentacles.
Okay, can I just, I'll jump in for 2 seconds and say that this would be an interesting addition to the public meetings that are held on sites like this, because you can't blend them. Or, I mean, you could try, except that the meeting would go on for so long. But I think this is an interesting input from a special group that you could feed into the broader public meeting that would be held on a development site like this within the 2-minute time frame that we have nowadays. So it's, you know, some idea of where you're going with this. Robert, you had a question? You're muted, I think.
Yes. One of the things that strikes me is this building has been very much, the front facade has been very much altered. Would the intention be to put it back to what we see in the earliest stage of its development? As architecturally, it's not doing very much now, frankly.
I'm not really aware of the details of the specific. I can say in general that is what we tend to look at. I think they are. I'm just looking.
Is that a Patrick question?
No, it's. I'm just getting some information from development staff. Thanks. Yes, they are proposing to restore it, and certainly I can say in general that would be the approach that we would take. You know, often if there are any properties that aren't being conserved that have value, we try to make sure that the remaining property or properties are looked after with great attention. So the other thing I want to say is that while we've come to think about listing and designation in a particular way, These buildings remain listed, and that may seem like cold comfort, but there is no reason why people can't conserve listed buildings. They still have value. The designation means that we have something in terms of a demolition application. It obviously is a stronger footing, but the street remains listed, and we continue to press on to have properties that are going to be conserved, even if they are listed, because they're not just listed. We believe they have value.
Okay. Jeff?
With respect to the fact that they are listed right now, yes, they're listed right now, but as of December 31, 2024, they will not be listed unless in the meantime they are designated. And I think our concern is that when they were multiple listed, it wasn't one property that was multiple listed. It was the street. So, you know, many parts of the street block, but at least if you take that block, it seems to me there should be some public, you know, presentation in terms of the report. It should identify that there were, you know, 10 projects, 10 buildings there, 10 properties, and we have decided to proceed to designate on the one, and we are not proceeding on the others. Or else, and I'm prepared to make a motion, I think Alex is prepared to make a motion, requesting staff to report back to the Toronto Preservation Board on a recommendation with respect to designation of the remaining 9 properties.
Well, the issue here, Jeff, is that this report is about the designation of one property. So the input into the dynamics of the application can be made, but not through this particular report, in my opinion. So we're trying to figure out a way forward, and I think I should probably curtail that conversation now. I wanted to give a flavor for the things we can talk about and a commitment of staff to recognize these kinds of issues. But right now, this report is recommending designation of this building. And the rest of it, Bill, you know, the work that we're going to do around the register, what we're going to do with listing, how that's going to work. This is good. This feeds a good conversation that we will also have in the new year with this board and others.
Okay. Any other questions of staff? Elizabeth?
So recognizing what was just said by Mary regarding the future discussion in the new year about listing and how you know the board and heritage planning will deal with these types of issues. I guess the direct question is how, or not how, but will there be an opportunity to designate the other 9 properties that are, I guess, to the south of the one that is being reported on today? Will there be an opportunity? Is there enough staff time and resources available to review the other 9 properties and to have them designated before the clock runs out?
I'm not entirely sure through the chair how to answer that question. This is the property that we're moving forward with designation. The others remain listed. We continue to work on behalf of the other properties, but the application is moving along. So this is the one that staff is confident we will be able to defend within the context of an OLT, with the understanding of the amount of the number of OLT hearings that staff will have to deal with, certainly are dealing with now and into the future. And so we're being very, by necessity, clear-eyed about the ones that we think are defensible at the OLT. And there are lots of things that go into that, and it is very site-specific. So I don't want to speak to the value of the other properties in this way, where they're listed, they have value. And this one, we are saying we should be designating now.
I guess my question, just to follow up, was slightly different. Not whether the buildings, the other 9 buildings, have merit, because that will be determined through the exploration of possible designation. It was rather to the effort, whether there are staff and other resources as required to undertake the effort to examine those other 9 properties and determine whether they are worthy of designation. Is there enough time, money, and staff or to be able to do that between now and when the clock runs out? I understand that they may perhaps not have merit to be designated, but that's a separate issue. The first concern is whether it's possible to actually do the work to determine whether we go down the road to designation. So that's really the question.
I would say through the chair that we have done the work for this application. We are currently have been doing the work. We have to consider every listed property within the application. And we make decisions about value, and we have all of the discussions that are going on within that application. So no, I would not at this time say that we would be revisiting the designation of these properties at this time.
Councillor Perks?
Yeah, Sandra, I'm sorry to intervene like this, but I think staff have made it pretty clear that at the current moment, we're considering this one property and that there's a process for discussing the larger issue that will take place next year. And I think we're putting them in a really awkward place by trying to get them to have that future conversation here today while we're considering just this one property. I'm wondering if we could just stay to the one property for now.
I understand. I think all that they're trying to ask is what are next steps. I mean, I think the frustration with the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act are being proactive, because if you have this one development, chances are you're going to have another one. And will you be able to go one by one? Because these properties, it's the parts being greater than the sum of the whole, that they create something wonderful when they're together. If you had a development where you only had 2 of them, it may be less defensible.
And I understand all of that. I completely understand all of that. I just think we're putting
I know they can't.
city staff in an impossible position by discussing something that's not in front of us right now.
Right.
I
agree.
Yeah.
No, I know how it went that way, but it's, I agree. So are there any other questions for staff right now? We can't go into a motion about we recommend that others are looked at or anything like that at this time. We're just focused on this property, as well as in the back of our minds the frustration of the changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. So I see nothing else. Robert? And this would be a question of staff?
No, it's commentary. I think you said we'd move to comments. So
yes. Okay. Let's comment. Any comments which is going to come?
Yeah, the thing that I guess unnerves me is that we talk about streetscapes, preservation of streetscapes. We don't talk about what's going on behind the walls of the streetscape. There's retail now, presumably viable footprints for retail. When we think about how that might be redeveloped, what we generally get, of course, is the lobbies for the residential and the parking ramps and maybe cycle parking and the whatever loading dock is required for that particular development, so that the retail ends up being not very practical. Whether that plays a role in the streetscape anymore, I'm pretty uncertain. So I think when we're talking about protecting Main Street buildings, we should go much further than talking about what the facade is like. That we should have some means of protecting the nature of those buildings in their role on the street. Anyway, this is, this is again beyond the point of this particular. But I do think we need to expand our horizon about this question. Now that's the. I'll stop there.
No, it's a very good point, and I think of you all the time because there's a whole development on Yonge Street that now looks to me like it's being sold as retail condo. In other words, you can buy the individual spaces, and that was a development that originally was just going to be totally facade. And you coined a wonderful term in relationship to that. But I think, I think that's not for this particular item, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have in the future.
Well, this is probably my last meeting, so I'll get it off my chest now.
Well, we can sit around and discuss it in our afterlives. Okay, so is there any more discussion on this particular property? Seeing none, I have a report in front of me with recommendations. Can I have a motion to adopt? Elizabeth, okay, all in favor? Okay, it's carried, but thank you, everyone. Okay, the next one is a really interesting one, PB 12.4 309 Cherry Street. Notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Who is presenting on behalf of staff? This one was held.
Hi, it's Emma Dodens. I'll be presenting for this.
Oh my goodness, we get to see you.
I know I'm the other
Just a pretty face behind the reports. Emma, go ahead, please. It's as soon as it comes up. You're the one who does it.
All right. Hello, everyone. I will be presenting for item number PB 12.4 309 Cherry Street. Notice of intention to designate a property under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The subject property of this report is a large, low-density lot located in the northwest section of the Portlands, approximately bounded by Cherry Street to the east, Villiers Street to the north, and Commissioner Street to the south. The property actually contains two detached buildings that both use the municipal address of 309 Cherry Street. However, what is most intriguing about these buildings is their noticeable differences in design and typology that arise from the fact that they were constructed over 20 years apart. The dialogue between these two buildings that is created by their occupying the same site contributes to an understanding of the historical development, context, and culture of the Portlands. The first building on site is the two-story former Bank of Montreal branch that was built in 1920 according to the classical revival designs of the architecture firm Darling and Pearson. And the second building on site is the 2 to 4 story former Canadian Oil Company's warehouse that was built in 1941. Staff have researched the subject property, and the two buildings were evaluated individually and collectively against the criteria prescribed in Ontario Regulation 906. The land comprising the subject property was once a marshland between Ashbridges Bay and the Toronto Harbour. The marsh was turned into a stable landmass through a sequence of dredging and infill work in the late 19th and early 20th centuries under the direction of the Toronto Harbour Commissioners, forerunner to today's Port Authority or Ports Toronto. The Harbour Commissioners was established in 1911 to address poor lakefront conditions that had arisen as a result of city pollution and general disuse. In response, the Harbour Commissioners presented strategies for the management and revitalization of Toronto's waterfront, including an ambitious plan for the development of the Ashbridges Bay area into the Toronto Harbour Industrial District, today's Portlands. So at first glance, the presence of a bank building at the entrance to a low-density industrial district appears incongruous with its surroundings. However, it is precisely the building's construction date, typology, and placement that yields information that contributes to an understanding of the post-World War I industrial culture of the Portlands. In the aftermath of the First World War, there was an economic upturn that saw the resumption of a competitiveness between chartered banks to expand and establish new branches. There was also growth occurring in the Portlands that centered around the operations of fuel companies, particularly coal and oil. Coal was integral to the heating of Toronto homes and businesses in the early 20th century, and the product played a key role in the development of the Port of Toronto because the port provided storage and handling facilities for more than 1 million tons of coal per year. And so in March 1920, the Harbour Commissioners leased part of the subject property to the Bank of Montreal for a period of 21 years. The Bank of Montreal was one of the first new structures built in the area after the war concluded, and the timing of its construction reflects a speculative investment based on the prospect of the continued growth of the Portlands that would require financial services. Its prominent placement at the intersection of Cherry and Villiers Streets represents a quintessential corner bank building, where it sits almost in anticipation of the Portland's future industrial success. The classical revival style of the bank building demonstrates the work of the esteemed architects Frank Darling and John Pearson of the firm Darling and Pearson, known for their quality contributions to the architecture in Toronto and across Canada. As a firm, they worked on a number of institutional projects, including the first Royal Ontario Museum and several landmark buildings within the University of Toronto precinct. One of the first important projects Darling executed was the design for the Bank of Montreal at Yonge and Front Street, now the Hockey Hall of Fame. In fact, over the span of his career, Darling designed over 100 bank buildings across Canada, and his contribution sought to define the bank typology in Canada and to cultivate a national corporate style. As such, the former bank has design and physical value as a representative example of a second classical revival bank typology. The resurgence of classical revival architecture in Toronto occurred from the late 19th century until about the 1930s, during which time the style was frequently applied to institutional buildings like post offices, libraries, and banks. Banks in particular were drawn to the symbolism of classical architecture because it projected ideals like stability, security, and even wealth, ideals which these institutions likewise wanted the public to associate with their business. By 1925, very few new industries had moved to the area. Although the Portlands had examples of manufacturing companies and port-related businesses operating in the district, the vast majority of land use remained devoted to coal and oil storage that required large open lots, which left less space for new development. Furthermore, the Great Depression of the 1930s resulted in economic stagnation, and much of the Harbour Commissioners' plans for a multifaceted industrial district were left unrealized. Both the Bank of Montreal and the Dominion Bank further south on Cherry Street had ceased banking operations by 1926. Therefore, while it may appear as an anachronism in Portland's architecture, the former Bank of Montreal stands as an historic marker of the post-World War I attitudes concerning the Portland's potential. Advancements in the automotive industry and fuel use meant that oil began to displace coal during and following the Second World War. As shown by these historic aerial photos, across the Portlands, the coal piles that once dominated the landscape were steadily replaced with oil tank farms throughout the 1930s and 40s. During that transition, in 1941, a 19-year lease option was negotiated between the Toronto Harbour Commissioners and the Canadian Oil Companies Limited for the same parcel of land that the Bank of Montreal had leased 22 years earlier, in addition to a large land parcel to the south that would become the site of their new oil storage warehouse, designed by the architect N.A. Armstrong and completed in 1941. The former Bank of Montreal building was converted into the oil company's offices at this time, and by 1945, Canadian Oil Companies had purchased and consolidated the lots. The warehouse has design and physical value as a representative example of a vernacular industrial building with key features of the Art Moderne style. Its design incorporates many of the main characteristics of Art Moderne, most notably in its low height, flat roof, lack of ornamentation, the rounded corners on the north elevation, and an overall emphasis on horizontality. The former Canadian Oil Company warehouse has contextual value because it is important in defining, supporting, and maintaining the character of the Portlands district as an industrial port that developed in connection with the operations of fuel storage. The low to mid-rise buildings of the early to mid-20th centuries maintained an historic scale in response to the nearby Keating Channel and shipping docks. The warehouse was purpose-built for the Canadian Oil Company for their offices and oil storage operations, a function which was typical of the industrial uses intended for the Portlands. While the building no longer actively functions as an oil storage warehouse, its industrial typology represents the character for which the Portlands is known. The former Bank of Montreal, together with the warehouse, are physically, visually, and historically linked to their surroundings, where they were built to capitalize on the financial potential of the area's growth and the functional operations of the Portlands, respectively. The subject property and its two buildings occupy a prominent location in the northwest area of the Portlands, a block that attracted many of the earliest buildings in the area, such as the Lindsay factories that is no longer extant, the Queen City Foundry built in 1914, and the Toronto Harbour Commissioner storage buildings built in 1916. These were followed in later years by the Toronto Hydro Substation at 201 Cherry Street, the former Dominion Bank at 275 Cherry Street, and the Fire Hall number 30 at 39 Commissioner Street. These buildings now form a concentrated collection of industrial and institutional buildings that represent the history and character of the Portlands and demonstrate how, despite not going exactly according to plan, the general direction of the Harbour Commissioner's plan still influenced the industrial functions that have characterized the Port Industrial District for over 100 years. Therefore, for the reasons explained in this presentation, staff have determined that the property at 309 Cherry Street is worthy of designation under Part 4, Section 29 of the Ontario Heritage Act, as it meets the criteria prescribed by Ontario Regulation 906 under all three categories of design, historical, associative, and contextual values. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Emma. It certainly is the answer to the question, what is that building doing there? Which anyone who's ridden by it on their bike has probably asked. Adam, you held this. Your question?
Thank you so much, Emma, for that absolutely wonderful report. This is actually kind of a broader question about the Portlands heritage element. So back in 2003, the city went through and did a survey of the district, and many buildings in the Portlands were listed or designated in 2003, 2004. I'm wondering, seeing as that's 20 years ago and there's been some changes to how the city views heritage, if it's possible to have staff to do another survey of that district, given the large redevelopment that's happening. There's some buildings that I think probably have heritage value that aren't currently on the heritage register that are in close proximity to this one. There's some wonderful old warehouses from the 1910s, 1920s. I think that now would be a really opportune time to have staff do a survey. This could even be done through satellite images and street view if need be, just to flag things that may not be on the heritage register at the current time in that area, but which certainly have heritage value.
I think we're veering into the same territory as the last report, Adam. We really have to focus on this building. But again, it may be an interesting suggestion and something that's raised at another time, but let's keep the focus so we can keep the focus today.
I'll follow up with staff directly. I just worry that sometimes these things are flagged as of interest to the board, but then there's, unfortunately, given how busy the schedules are, it does fall to the wayside.
Okay.
If I may just, Adam, we can let you know there was a comprehensive heritage study and review done as part of the Villiers Island project and the flood protection project. We worked very closely with Waterfront Toronto and others. So if you want some information about that, you can email me.
Absolutely will do. And I just want to add that it's really wonderful they had the seeds from the 1890s that started to grow for that natural heritage from the 1800s. Plants suddenly start growing when they move the mud off them.
Yeah.
Anyways, yep. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Oh, Madam Chair is now on the phone. And thank you, Mary.
Sorry, my husband isn't home, and that was the water meter man coming from the city a second time. I apologize. Okay, so are there any, Adam, you've got your answer. Are there any other questions of staff about these buildings? Seeing none, any discussion among us? Nope. I have a staff report before me. May I have a motion to adopt? Barbara, all in favor? Carried. Okay, sorry about that. I just saw that my husband wasn't there to grab it. Okay, the joys of working from home. Okay, the next item is PB 12.5, 47, 49, 51. I feel like a football coach. 47, 49, 51, 53, 55, 57, 59, 63, 65 Huntley Street, 137911 Selby Street, 1618 Linden Street, alterations to designated heritage properties, 47 Huntley Street to Linden Street, demolition on a heritage property, authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. We have a speaker, and we also have Georgia to present to us today.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Georgia Cush. I'm a senior heritage planner, and I am presenting the staff report recommending approval of the alterations to the properties that the chair just mentioned, including the demolition of the structure at 2 Linden Street, which is part of 47 Huntley Street. So next slide, please. There are 16 heritage properties on the site, which is situated in the western portion of the block bounded by Sherbourne, Linden, Huntley, and Selby Streets. On the left is the location map, and on the right is an aerial view, which shows the irregular shape of the site outlined in blue. Next, please. I'm going to start with a photographic walkabout showing the properties that were designated in 2022. First, I'd like to note that I incorrectly labeled the street numbers in the photos in the reports, and they should actually read from right to left, not left to right. So we're going to begin on Linden Street at the southeast corner of the site, and that's shown on the map with a yellow star. And on the right, we have 16 to 18 Linden Street. Next, please. And as we walk west, we come to 2 Linden, and this is the addition to the rear of the corner house at 47 Huntley, and this is the portion of the building that is proposed to be demolished. So let's continue. Next slide, please. So we turn the corner and we're now on Huntley Street, and here we have 47 to 59 Huntley Street. Next, please. And at the top of Huntley, we have numbers 63 to 65. And of course, I mixed the slides up on here as well. So on the left, we have 63 to 65 Huntley. And as we turn the corner onto Selby, this is the rear addition to 65 Huntley, known as 1A Selby Street. Next, please. As we walk along Selby, we have numbers 1 to 3 and 7 to 11. And I think that's it. So next slide, please. So the proposed alterations are made in connection with an official plan amendment and rezoning application, which has been appealed to the OLT. All of the heritage properties are proposed to be rehabilitated for new mixed uses and the addition of 2 residential towers on the site, as well as a POPs and a daycare, with the exception of the rear addition to 47 Huntley, known as 2 Linden, which is proposed to be demolished to make way for a new public park. So here's the roof plan, and it shows the extent of the building retention and reconstruction. So the pink portions, if you can see it, show the building retention in situ. The green portions show where the roofs will be reconstructed to match the original, and the purple areas where the roof will be modified to accommodate a new terrace. Next slide, please. And in this site plan, you can see the location of the towers and their step backs, and the location of the new public park at the bottom left, which replaces the rear addition at 47 Huntley. In the original submission, it's worth noting that the proposal included the demolition of several of the buildings, and now all but the rear addition at 2 Linden will be conserved. Next slide. Here's a proposed elevation for Linden Street, and this shows the tower step backs from Huntley, which have actually been increased from the original submission, where the new tower is now placed at the rear wall of the houses on Huntley rather than on top of them, and is gently sloped out so as not to create a hard cantilever. Next, please. Here's the proposed Huntley Street elevation. There's a 5-meter step back from Selby over the corner property, And next slide, please. Here's the proposed elevation for Selby Street, and it's not shown here, but the tower step back is almost 7 meters over the easternmost properties, shown here on the left. Now, there will be some interventions for the new uses of the buildings, which will be detailed in a conservation plan on a case-by-case basis, and of course, satisfactory to the senior manager of heritage planning. For example, there will be barrier-free modifications to those buildings that will be converted to commercial or community uses. And also consideration will be given to the treatment of the new rear walls of the southernmost Huntley houses that will face onto the new public park. And as well, there will likely be minor interventions such as new openings in the reconstructed sidewall of 11 Selby that will face the POPs. So again, those will be looked at on a case-by-case basis and will be reviewed by staff and detailed in the conservation plan. Also, there will be other details in the conservation plan that relate to the masonry, window conservation, etc. So overall, this project presents a much improved conservation strategy than that which was originally submitted. Staff acknowledge that the rear portion of 47 Linden is proposed to be demolished, but can support its removal given the substantial amount of conservation that is being achieved on the site, and knowing that the original building at 47 Linden will remain and be conserved. So overall, staff do support the proposal as meeting the intent of the official plan, heritage policies, and recommend approval and request authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement to secure the long-term conservation of these 16 heritage properties. Thank you.
Super, Georgia. Thank you very much. Are there questions of Georgia? Oh, sorry. Before I do that, Dan Elon is here from ERA. Hiya, Dan. Are you presenting or here to answer questions?
I just had a couple slides to share with the board and add a couple points to George's presentation. I know you want me to be very short because you already have the reports. So I'll just go through this very quickly.
Super. Okay. So just, there's the 5-minute maximum.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay.
So hopefully you can see my screen now. This is just the cover sheet to the presentation. So again, this is for the Huntley Linden project. So as we came to the site, obviously there's many properties that need to be assessed. We did a comprehensive cultural heritage evaluation report that was included on our heritage impact assessment. So we looked at all of the properties here, looked at them at both individually, but also trying to really understand the context. That's really one of the things that I want to highlight in this presentation. So once we went through that exercise and we did condition assessments and visited the site and walked around the entire block, we reduced the number of properties. We were able to eliminate some properties that were not heritage. So we have some assessments in our report. They didn't all align with staff's understanding, and staff then brought forward designations for those properties. And this map reflects those designations. And through the process that we went through with the city, we devised a conservation strategy that responds to the points that the city has raised, but also achieving many other city building objectives. And so when we take a step back and we, in our heritage reports, the diagrams get really kind of technical in terms of which particular elevations retain and what's rebuilt. But holistically, when we take a step back, when we really look at the entirety of the site, when all of the work is done, the buildings here that have the blue hatch and the magenta contour line around them, those are the extents of the facades and buildings that would be reinstated on the site. And what we want to highlight in this diagram is also the contribution of the park and a major pop element that goes north south through the site. And together the pops and the park are going to work together. There's an existing laneway that bisects the site, and this is a way to reorient that to a pedestrian use and create this amenity space around the development. And the concept here is largely, when we were looking at the balancing of some of the competing objectives, was as much as possible to maintain the streetscape character. So I think Bob spoke to this earlier on in the meeting. So as you walk down Huntley, as you walk down Selby, many of those buildings that you see there today will remain, and with returns. And then also we were sensitive in working with the design team and the developer really to look at what uses will be in those buildings. So essentially there's only a couple of areas that get converted to retail use, and the majority of the buildings that are used as residential will remain residential, and they'll continue to be demised in a similar manner as to they are today in terms of the number of units, or the partitioning of semi-detached buildings. And so that, I think, is something that we had in mind. And then anywhere, as Georgia had mentioned, where we're changing the use, we're going to need to look at making alterations to the properties to allow for barrier-free access and other functional needs to service the site. So I think those are the broad strokes. I'm obviously able to answer questions. There's quite a lot of reporting that we've done to date. So I imagine that you might have questions that come up after the fact. I'm always available to answer those if needed.
Super, Dan. Thank you very, very much. So do we have questions for Dan?
I have some. I'm not sure if that's directed towards city staff.
No, I'm
so I'll
asking
jump in
about
now.
questions for Dan first.
Yep, let's do one for
Okay.
Dan. I was
Hold on.
disappointed.
Is this for Dan or
It's for Dan, yes.
Okay, sorry, Adam. Go ahead.
But city staff may also have input as well. It's one of these questions that bridges both the applicant and the city staff.
Okay.
So I'm very involved with this area of the city and heritage-related advocacy. Oh, I see the clock's going. Thank you, clerks. There's a few different points I'm going to make. So it looks like the Edwardian built heritage of this site is basically being obliterated, and the focus is on the Victorian. I've noticed every building that's proposed for demolition is from the Edwardian period. There was originally proposals to retain 8 Linden Street. That's now gone, as well as the addition on the rear of 47 Huntley, which is a World War I era apartment building. I'm just wondering if any consideration was given within ERA's assessment to maybe retain some of that Edwardian heritage, particularly 8 Linden Street. It could be rolled on the site to another location. And you would have had some of that representation from that second period of development for this site, which is equally as important as the Victorian built heritage.
Dan, Georgia, who?
Yeah, well, certainly. I think it's a good question. If you look at our reporting, we had identified 8 Linden as a heritage property in our assessment. The city came back and didn't agree with those findings, and that happens. Sometimes we have certain recommendations or findings, and the city has a different lens that they look at that. You can see in our report, page 106 of the Heritage Impact Assessment, that there is a considered alternative for the development where 47, 49 to Linden would be removed to make way for the park on the site combined with the POPs, as well as the retention of 8 Linden, and that was going to be retained in place. So we've looked at a number of different strategies for the site, and part of our effort to come to a resolution that meets many of the interdepartmental needs of the city or requirements of the city, as well as how to achieve the level of development on the site to afford this high level of conservation in terms of the number of resources that we're working with on the site. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't know if it might not be as satisfying, but yeah.
Just roll 8 Linden to where you have that contemporary addition next to the POPs, and you would have at least some representation of the Edwardian development period of this site.
Oh, we're not going to go there.
We're not going to go there right now, but Sandra, I do have a question for staff when we go to that section.
Okay.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, did you have a question? No? Did anyone else have a question of Dan? Okay. Don't totally disappear, Dan, but in theory, you're done. Georgia? Who has questions for Georgia? Dan. Adam. Okay, go ahead.
So, again, just to reiterate, I've been very involved with this area with heritage research. I was quite disappointed by the lack of associative data, not in the city reports, but in the developers HIA. Can we introduce a motion to ask, as part of the heritage easement agreement, they have to do associative research into each of these properties. This is Upper Jarvis. It's a very influential area in the city. It was a very wealthy area, and a number of very influential people resided at these properties. Peter Kafka, the chief architect of Hungary, hid in 63-65 Huntley when he escaped the regime in the 1950s. There was suffragette activism on that block, connections to the Rundle family, who designed many of the mansions and worked with E.J. Lennox. And none of this associative history has made it into the report so far today. So as part of accepting this, can we introduce a motion to ask them to do associative research for this site? It's a huge entire city block basically going, so a great opportunity for commemoration if things come up with this research.
Mary is there. Speak, Mary.
Thank you. Very important points. Research for research sake alone, no, but research to inform the interpretation plan, which
Yes.
we have to definitely do for every for every development in the city, and those are very important things to raise as a part of the interpretation plan. And so we are requiring an interpretation plan. If you wish to put a special point on themes that you think are fundamental in your mind at this point, we can tack that on as part of a motion. It isn't necessary. Staff are listening, and we will ensure that to happen. But I have certainly had times when the board has been keen to make sure that particular themes are represented, and it's not a bad idea. So we could work on a motion with you, Adam, if you wish.
That might be beneficial, because I just worry with the interpretation plan, what we might get is that, oh, these are representative of the Bay and Gable house form style of the late 19th century development of Jarvis, and then missing, for example, the connections to the Rundle family, or that the chief architect of Hungary hid there when he was fleeing from the regime change in 1956, things like that. That these are specific to the individual properties, but unless somebody does a deep dive into them, then we're going to miss it with the interpretation plan potentially.
Yes, having all the information available, then there could be a robust interpretation plan that reflects it. Certainly all of the details that might be considered important for every individual house would be difficult to work into the plans, but each of the buildings as designated buildings will have plaques. That is a part of the requirement of the Heritage Easement Agreement. And so there is something as well that we could work with Heritage Toronto to let them know that during the plaquing that there could be some special recognition given to something associated for each of the, so that we can do that as well. But we could craft a simple but important motion to tack on.
Right, I think that would be appreciated. So if the clerks could help me with that, that'd be hugely appreciated. Because, like I said, this is an entire city block going in one go in a very historically significant area of downtown Toronto. So a lot of potential here, and I worry that if it's not done now, then when will it happen? And especially if this is already going to OLT.
Yeah, and this is an extraordinary conservation achievement, I have to say. So congratulations to everybody on it. And so to have all the work that's done recognized in every way is really important. So
okay.
And I do want to compliment on the conservation strategy. It's wonderful, but just adding that associative stuff, I think, would be very important. It would help complete a more holistic approach to it.
Okay.
So clerks.
Okay, so you're going to work on a motion. Yep. In the meantime, are there any other questions of staff? Okay, seeing none, is there any other discussion amongst us? Okay, I see none, so I'll just hold this item down while you come up with your motion, and we'll come back to it. So that's, okay, 12.5. So let's move on in the meantime to 12.6, 69 Yonge Street and 3 King Street East. Alterations to a designated heritage property and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. We do have a speaker, so who from staff is presenting first? Georgia again?
Madam Chair, that's me again.
Okay.
I am very happy to recommend approval of the alterations to this property, 69 Yonge Street and 3 King Street East, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. Next slide, please. This property is situated on the southeast corner of Yonge and King Streets, and the heritage building itself is L-shaped. Next slide, please. The Canadian Pacific Railway building was constructed between 1911 and 1913 to the design of Darling and Pearson and was designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act in 1990. It is one of 3 important early 20th century skyscrapers situated at this intersection. Next, please. Here's a rendering of the proposal, which is to convert the building to residential uses at levels 2 to 15. The entirety of the building will be retained in situ, with a 21-story residential tower infilling the mostly vacant southeast corner of the site. Next, please. This roof plan shows a 6-story portion of the new tower, which will be set on top of the Heritage Building, but set back 4.1 meters from the 2 primary elevations facing Yonge and King Streets and behind the cupolas. Next, please. The new building will tie into the floor levels of the Heritage Building through selected areas of rear-facing walls. Next. The new addition has been designed to complement the heritage resource and to be truly subordinate. Additional conservation measures are also proposed and include reinstating the clocks above the entrances, conservation of the limestone and marble. And next, please. Here's a before and after of the ground floor level showing the restoration of the ground floor double height windows to remove the non-original transom. And they're also going to retain the legible imprint of the Canadian Pacific Building lettering on the north and west elevations. All in all, staff wholeheartedly recommend approval of the alterations to this significant heritage property. The new development introduces a new built form that is sensitive and subordinate to the Heritage Building and conserves all of its heritage attributes. Authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement is also recommended. Thank you.
Super, Georgia. Thank you. We have Michael McClelland here. Is that the truth?
Yes, it is. I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Hi. Hi, Michael.
And I'm here really to answer questions. We're really pleased with this project. We're really pleased with the reception from the city. It does deal with the delicate matter of changing office use to residential use. And we felt in this particular case, it frankly was lousy office space and very difficult to compete in the office market, but makes great residential apartments. So we're really pleased that this transition's happened and that we've got the support of the city in doing it.
Super, thank you. So does anyone have any questions of Michael? Okay, any questions of Georgia? Any discussion amongst us other than to say it must have been fun working on this one? Adam?
Great to see the restoration of this really important early 20th century skyscraper in downtown Toronto. I'm a bit confused about the modern addition with the very atypical arches, and that was a point that was raised at the panel discussion recently, that the arches, it was compared to a melting ice cream cone. But very but the kind of irregular arches on the back, I wonder if maybe this should have been directed towards staff or one of the design team, but I'm just curious about what went into that design choice for this addition on the back of the skyscraper.
Well, we worked very closely, Adam, thank you for the question. We worked very closely with the architecture firm Partisans, who are very well-known, respected modern firm. And we worked through with them how to do this. It's a question of on the street, how visible is this? It's not that visible. It does affect the back of the building and the rear portion of the building that had basically a void. And so, but we're looking at it as a transition, and we'll look at it from the material aspect, which is still being sorted out. But I think we're trying to be open to the idea that there are going to be a modern component to this addition.
Yep.
And we didn't want to fake, frankly, we didn't want to fake a Darling and Pearson design.
Of course, but also just the way the arches are connected on different levels, it does have some strange appearance right now, but thank you for that explanation.
Okay, anything else? Okay, I have a report before me. Anyone like to make a motion to adopt? Julia, all in favor? Carried. Okay, how are we doing with the previous? Do we have a motion yet for 12.5? Don't make me say all those addresses again.
I reached out to the city clerks by email. I've not heard back yet, so I'm hoping they can assist me with the wording.
There's Matthew right there.
Hi, Madam Chair, and Adam, I'm just looking at it right now, just putting it into the form of a motion.
Thank you so
Give
much.
me one more item, and I'll have this one ready. Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to 12.7. Okay, 600 King Street West, alterations to a heritage property, demolition of a building, and authority to enter into a heritage easement agreement. Who is presenting? That's Anne. Hi, Anne.
Hi, yes, that was me. Good morning. My name is Anne Fisher. I'm a program manager here at Heritage Planning, and I'm here to outline the proposals for a property at 600 King Street West. This proposal is seeking permission under Section 33 of the Heritage Act for alterations to a property at 600 King Street West in connection with the construction of roof, rear and side additions, and to enter into a heritage easement agreement for this property. And in addition, it is seeking permission under Section 34 of the Heritage Act for the demolition of a building on the property. The building that is proposed to be removed is a rear single-storey outbuilding that is not of any heritage value. Next slide, please. This is the location plan. The subject property is located on the north side of King Street West at its intersection with Portland Street. It is within the King Spadina Heritage Conservation District that has been approved by council but is subject to an appeal and is not yet in force in effect. The blue stars on this plan show the adjacent heritage buildings. Adjacent to the complex adjacent is a complex of buildings to the east, the former Lee Valley site that is designated and had permission in 2020 for a large redevelopment that included a 6-storey roof addition fronting onto King Street. On the other side of Portland Street, to the west, is another designated property, and opposite the site on King Street West are a number of buildings that are listed and are noted as contributing in the King Spadina Heritage Conservation District. Next slide, please. This slide is photographs of the heritage building in question. This is known as the Beatty Manufacturing Company building. It was built in 1901 by Chadwick and Beckett in the Edwardian classical style. And the designation bylaw also notes that its detailing displays a high degree of craftsmanship. It was used until 1987 as part of the manufacturing of for fashion and upholstery products, and as such it made a notable contribution to the identity of the King Spadina neighbourhood as part of the city's fashion district. And then after 1987 it was adapted into a brewery restaurant, which received an award from the Toronto Historical Board in 1988. This change played a notable role in the revitalization of the neighborhood into a vibrant commercial and cultural center. The photograph on the left shows the views of the property at the intersection of King and Portland Street. The bottom photograph, the arrow shows the single-story rear building that is proposed to be demolished. You can also see on this photograph a 2-story fire escape stair that is proposed to be retained. And the photograph on the right shows the east side of the subject property, which includes the laneway that runs at the side of the property. The fire escape stair that you see here is proposed to be replaced. It'll be pushed back a bit and enclosed. Next slide, please. This slide shows the ground and third floors. The second floor is very, very similar, so I haven't included it here. The red box shows the proposed 4-story rear addition. There is a 3-meter deep reveal at the back of the heritage building to provide some visual distinction between the existing building and this addition along Portland Street. And you can see on the third floor plan at the bottom, the relocation of the side staircase in the laneway on the eastern side of the building that is now being set back further and enclosed. Next slide, please. This plan shows the 4th and 5th floors. The top plan is the 4th floor, which shows the whole of the existing building is proposed to be conserved. The rear addition is highlighted in red. A proposed 3.2 metre wide side addition is also shown in red on the fourth floor plan. This would extend over part of the laneway and would be supported by 4 exterior columns. The roof addition starts at the 5th floor level. This would be stepped back from King Street by 5 metres, which is similar to the approved step back for the development at the adjacent Lee Valley building. The roof addition would then be stepped back by 3 metres along the Portland Street frontage. There is a terrace within these step backs on the roof, which is similar to the existing, although the proposed new terrace railing along the King Street frontage is stepped back further from the existing one. Next slide, please. This is the 6th, 8th and 9th and the mechanical penthouse floors. The roof addition on the 6th floor plan is very similar to the one below. However, it does now include a 1 metre deep cantilever along the Portland Street frontage. This cantilever is stepped back at both its front and the rear by over 4 metres in order to reduce the visual impact that it would have from the public realm. The 7th floor massing matches the one that of the 6th floor, so I haven't included it here. The 8th and 9th floor massing is shown in the middle floor plan, which this is also stepped back further on all sides. So it's stepped back by 9.33 metres from King Street, by over 2 metres from Portland Street, approximately 5 metres from the east, and approximately 5.5 metres from the rear. And the mechanical penthouse above this has further step backs from both the front and the rear. Next slide, please. This is the King Street elevation, proposed elevation. And you can see here the step backs from Portland Street of the proposed roof addition. You can also see the proposed side addition that extends over part of the laneway. This elevation includes the approved massing of the additions of the adjacent former Lee Valley building, so you can see their relationship together. The additions would be clad in curtain wall glazing. The front facade of the heritage building would be fully restored. The existing original ground floor windows would be retained, and all other windows that are not original would be replaced with new windows in the existing openings that would reflect the design of those that originally existed on the property based on archival documentation. Next slide, please. This is the proposed Portland Street elevation, and you can see the impact of the step backs from King Street. The design of the proposed 4-storey addition at the back of the property is also shown here. This will be clad in masonry and has been designed to have a complementary relationship to the existing heritage building. The reveal between the heritage building and this rear addition is also shown here. The Portland Street facade of the heritage building would be fully restored. As I've said before, the existing fire escape would remain, but an existing modern service store along this frontage would be restored as a window to reflect the original condition. Next slide, please. This slide shows the other 2 elevations. On the left is the east side elevation that fronts onto that would front onto the laneway, and the other slide is the rear elevation. Next slide, please. So these are 2 renderings that depict the massing of the proposed additions. And the next slide, please. So these are 2 further renderings. On the left is the rendering that show how the proposed massing would relate to the approved massing of the adjacent Lee Valley building. And the other rendering shows the impact on the laneway on the east side of 600 King Street West. This scheme includes the conservation and restoration of the whole of the former BT Manufacturing Company building. The proposed rear addition is being removed. The rear building is supposed to be removed, but that is of no heritage value. The private laneway, although being partly built over, would remain and would be visible from the public realm. The additions are set back, so the heritage building will retain its visual prominence from the street and have been designed to not overwhelm the heritage building, but to be visually subordinate and compatible with it. As such, our staff are recommending this scheme is approved. Thank you.
Super, and thank you very much. And we have Jordan Molnar here from ERA.
Yes, hi.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Where are you? Where are you? Or are you on the
Yes.
phone?
Yes, starting video, yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
There you are. Hi, Jordan.
Hi. So I'm just here to answer questions. I do not have a presentation.
Okay, are there any questions for Jordan from ERA Architects? Robert?
Yes, could we look at the presentation we've just seen? I'm particularly interested in the model of from King Street. Yeah. I'm wondering if the step backs that we see from King Street, I'm interested in the black rendered element and the slab building behind. Is this a result of having to step back at some upper level? Well, what's disconcerting to me is this is almost a really elegant scheme. And what I would prefer to see is that black element disappear on King Street, and maybe additional floor space, different additional bay, perhaps on advancing to King Street of the slab. It seems to me it's potentially so simple as a presentation of a new building on an old building, without that black rendered portion of the building.
So if this is a question about materiality, it's something
Well,
that
it's a question of whether this comes about because of step backs from King Street, I would assume.
Well, part of it is to create a clear separation from the existing building by having a darker structure there, but also materiality wise, it is something that still is being considered and still to be worked out. So the tinting on that glass, the structure can be modified.
Well, obviously not going to redesign this building in this session, but it does bear further. I would have thought further examination. I understand the black line separating the two buildings at whatever it is, 7th floor level or whatever. But it's this additional element that sits above, that separates the existing building and the two. I think it would be a much cleaner presentation of what's going on here.
Okay.
Without that element, the black element. And the floor space perhaps picked up through extending what I'm calling the slab building on the top.
Anyways, that could be considered, I guess. Yeah. Are there any other questions for Jordan? Don't see any. Okay, thank you. What about for Anne? Questions of staff? Don't see any. Any discussion among us? Don't see any. Okay, I have a report before me. Can I have a motion to adopt? Anyone? Yeah, Elizabeth, all in favor? So that's adopted. Thank you, and thank you, Jordan, for coming, and thank you, Anne. Okay. So we have to go back to 12.5. Are we ready? Matthew? Yeah.
Yes, we have
Just
a
reading what
motion.
Matthew's, yeah, set back.
And Adam is just reading it now.
Okay.
Yes, that's a good motion. Thank you.
Okay. 5B. Okay, can everyone see it? Can everyone read it? Do you want me to read it out loud? Should I be doing that anyways, Matthew?
It's displayed here on the screen. I think if anyone needs it read, that's fine. But
Okay.
I think everyone can see it here.
Okay. People need another minute.
Oh.
Okay. So, are there any comments about this before we vote on it? Nope. Okay. So here we go. We have to first vote on accepting the amendment, and then we have to vote on adopting the report as amended, if we accept the amendment. Okay, so would somebody like to make a motion to adopt the amendment? Like Adam, for example? Thank you. All in favor? Okay. And now can I have a motion to adopt the report as amended? Julia? Okay, all in favor? Done. Okay, so now we go on to the very last item of my entire life, and that is PB 12.8, designation of the Cabbagetown Southwest Heritage Conservation District under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I wanted to hold it for two reasons. One, I know how much work city staff, Clint Robertson, put into this in particular. And two, we have an extended presentation from the heritage consultant Evoke that I think we should watch. So let's start with Clint and take it from there. Clint?
Back. Where are you off to?
There we go.
There you are. Okay.
And I come back.
Through the chair, good morning,
Who's
members of the board.
speaking? Sorry, just 1 second.
Sorry, we've muted somebody. It's okay, Madam Chair. We've found who
Okay.
was unmuted.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead, Clint.
Sure. Members of the board, Councillor Perks and Madam Chair, my name is Clint Robertson, and I'm a heritage planner with the City of Toronto Policy and Research. I'm also the project lead for the Cabbagetown Southwest HCD. This morning, I'll be presenting item PB 12.8, designation of the Cabbagetown Southwest Heritage Conservation District under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. I'm very pleased to bring this plan forward for this very special area. I would like to first take a moment to sincerely thank everybody who contributed to this plan, especially the community members, and particularly the community advisory group that was formed and the Cabbagetown HCD committee. Additional thanks to the consulting team and especially the lead consultant Evoke Architecture, who will be presenting the details of the plan after my presentation. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm not seeing the presentation. Did it disappear? Okay, perfect. What is the Cabbagetown Southwest HCD? The HCD designates the area defined by bylaw under Part 5 of the Ontario Heritage Act. And to the right, you can see the subject area. The purpose of the plan is to manage change in the district to conserve the area's cultural heritage value by implementing policies and guidelines. The plan requires several things under the Ontario Heritage Act: a statement of objectives, a statement of cultural heritage value, a description of the heritage attributes of the HCD and properties in the district, policy statements, guidelines, and procedures to achieve these objectives, and a description of minor alterations not requiring a heritage permit. Additionally, at least 25% of the properties in the area must satisfy 2 or more of the 9 criteria for determining cultural heritage value or interest. The Cabbagetown Southwest HCD study process and the HCD plan have been prepared in accordance with provincial legislation and Heritage Conservation Districts in Toronto procedures, policies, and terms of reference. Next slide, please. Cabbagetown Southwest is a place of cultural heritage value. Cabbagetown Southwest is a historic and excellent example of a Victorian neighborhood in Toronto. The coherent collection of 19th and early 20th century properties express a high quality of architectural style and rich detailing. Throughout the district, properties with a consistent architectural character contribute to streetscapes and a sense of place. The Cabbagetown Southwest cultural heritage values are based on its historical and associative values as an early Toronto residential neighborhood with a highly diverse socioeconomic population. Its design and physical values as an excellent representation of a dense Victorian neighborhood with a high concentration of bay and gable buildings in particular. Its contextual values as a neighborhood with a cohesive built form that is situated near large-scale developments, and its social and community value relating to its existing and historic institutions that have served the neighborhood since the 19th century, as well as its history of community activism. Next slide. To give you some context, the Cabbagetown Southwest HCD will be the 6th HCD in the area. It is adjacent to Cabbagetown North HCD from 2003, Cabbagetown South HCD from 2005, and the Garden District HCD from 2016 immediately to the west. And on the map to the right, you can see the subject area of Cabbagetown Southwest, which is shaded in a brownish gray color, with the existing HCDs shown in red. Next slide. The HCD plan comprises 589 properties in total, 484 of which are contributing properties, so approximately 82% of properties, far exceeding the 25% requirement as laid out by the province. 105 of those properties are non-contributing, or 18%, and all 484 contributing properties meet at least 3 criteria of cultural heritage value or interest. The plan area includes 52 currently listed properties already on the Heritage Register, and also includes 9 properties currently designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. Next slide. Just the timeline in brief. In 2019, the HCD study report was endorsed by this board. In 2020, the HCD plan phase was initiated. From 2020 to 2023, there was 5 community advisory group meetings with the dates shown. In 2021, we had a community consultation meeting virtually. 2021 to 2022, the HCD plan was paused during the pandemic and as a result of the project lead leaving the city. In 2023, we embarked upon an Indigenous engagement process, which was city-led. Also in 2023, we had our other open house community consultation meeting in September. And finally, over the course of the year, the plan was finalized with community and stakeholder consultation. Next slide. So the process of HCD plan finalization, after TPB today, the plan will go to Toronto and East York Community Council. on the 24th of January. And after that, it will go to City Council at their February 6th to 8th meetings. And I just need to point out that there was several changes with the report and the attachment subsequent to its initial posting. They have been revised, and I'm just going to point those out. Subsequently, the revisions were posted online on the agenda, but just in brief, I will advise you of what those were. In the staff report, there was a revision to page 8, the project background section, in the 7th paragraph. And essentially that change just reflected a change in the total number of properties that were encompassed in the plan. So that paragraph now reads, city staff and Evoke consultants re-examined all of the properties within the boundary of the district and determined that 484 of 589 properties, or 82% of properties, satisfy 2 or more criteria, which far exceeds the provincial prescribed criteria of 25%. One other change occurred in the report on page 11, 4th paragraph, again dealing with the numbers of properties, and it now reads there are 589 properties within the district. 484 properties have been identified as contributing, and 105 are identified as non-contributing. In attachment 5, there was some changes to the list of addresses of contributing properties and non-contributing properties. I'll note that the map was correct in the first version and did not change. So in attachment 5 of the plan, or Appendix C, 2 addresses were deleted because they were actually entrance addresses. And one property, 227 Ontario Street, was moved over to the non-contributing list. And then also there was several properties added to the non-contributing list. I'll just read them very briefly. There was only 6: 254 Berkeley Street, 48 Coatsworth Street, 50 Coatsworth Street, 410 Parliament Street, 88 and 90 Paulette Street. Again, they were added to the list of non-contributing resources, and the map did not change. Finally, in attachment 6, the statement of contributions, we noticed that there was 5 properties that were omitted as having a write-up in the statement of contribution: 231 Ontario Street, 233 Ontario Street, 238 Ontario Street, 240 Ontario Street, and 241 Ontario Street. So those statements were added subsequently. And based on community feedback, we added a bit more information and modified some information about dates and style for 139 Seton, 236 Ontario, and 264 Ontario Street. So all fairly minor changes in nature. I'm now going to turn this over to Dima Cook with Evoke Architecture, the lead consultant on the HCD plan, to identify the details of the plan itself. And that concludes my portion of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Apologies to interrupt us, Adam Wynn. The versions on the agenda don't have those changes made right now. Are they going to be uploaded?
No, I looked at the agenda this morning, and the revised attachments and revised report were there.
Oh, I'm looking at the version that it links to, and I'm not seeing it on there, unfortunately.
I checked it this morning, and they are there.
They should be labeled as December 6th on the online agenda.
I'm just checking again, but I did
my
check
apologies.
this morning.
It's showing. My apologies. Yes, it's going out of order on my screen. It's the dates are all jumbled up. Thank you so much for that clarification.
Sure.
Would it be possible to allow me to share? Thank you very much.
It's Tamara Anson Cartwright, Program Manager. I just wanted to add that in the community consultation and the results of that, we only heard positive and engaged discussion and dialogue on the numerous meetings that we had. Of course, there's always individuals who will have questions and concerns, but I just wanted to reflect that the record, as noted in the plan itself, the results of that community consultation, and a great tribute to our consulting team to help us do that. So over to you, Dima.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to present. As Clint mentioned, this has been a long process since we started the FUT study phase, and hopefully this is going to, of course, it's not moving. Just give me a second. Okay. We came and presented the study for you back in May 2019. The study itself looked at the history and evolution of the neighborhood. We did a complete and pretty detailed character analysis, understanding the significance of the area. Our analysis led us to alter the original study boundary to the boundary that is currently now in the HCD. And that's based on the research on the contextual values of the area, the evolution of the area, as well as the buildings within. To touch back and sort of a bit of a refresher on why this area is being designated, it's a fairly special part of the city. It is one of the earlier parts of development within the city. And in looking at the evolution of this area, we looked at first its initial period, and its initial period at this moment is really marked by the street divisions that are particular and reflect the park lots that were that the city was originally divided in, anything north of the original 10 blocks of the city, and those park lots are still reflected in the current street plans and layouts of the neighborhood. The area was then a very, very intense period of development and intensification. So it was a very attractive area for people to move into. What you see here on the map, and this is from the study period, our study maps, everything that's in orange was built during that really intense period from about 1856 to 1919. And that's certainly reflected in the architectural styles and building typologies that we see today. Following in the 1920s to about 1945, there was a period where people started moving out of the area, so it was a bunch of residential stagnation. We did not see a lot of residential construction, and there was some industry that moved in, particularly in the southeast corner. And we noted that in the study phase that there was a lot of demolition done there, as well as a lot of new construction. It's one of the reasons why that southeast corner was actually removed from the final study boundary, or the HCD boundary. And finally, we come to the area today where there's been a resurgence and a big push of moving back into the neighborhood starting in the 1970s. And we also see in this district very strong community activism, particularly with the LGBTQ community. There was a lot of institutions that supported that community within the area. There were significant links to the CBC when the CBC was located there. And what we still see today are very active residential communities and residential groups such as the Cabbagetown BIA, the Cabbagetown Preservation Association, and the Cabbagetown HCD Advisory. As Clint mentioned, there are about 52 properties that are listed and 9 that are under Part A that are still there. So what makes Cabbagetown so special, or Cabbagetown Southwest? It is a very the development and what's reflected in the architecture from its diversity, from its socioeconomic population, and we see that in the architecture and the type of buildings and variety of buildings there. It has a very high and excellent representation of a very dense and very well-built and consistent Victorian neighborhood, as a high concentration of bay and gable buildings. And it also has an important contextual role. And this is in contrast to areas south in the city where we saw around Moss Park and Regent Park a lot of large-scale demolitions. So anything south of Shuter that we see today, contrasting to what was conserved and was fought to be conserved by the residents north of Shuter that still we see today in the character and definition of the neighborhood. The heritage attributes of the Cabbagetown South area area. It is predominantly low-rise, 1 to 3-story buildings. There is a real consistency in articulation and characterization of the street wall. There's a real fine-grained typology of the lot sizes and development of the houses. There's a real balance in the articulation of the architecture. There's a real family of architecture, even within the variety. We see that in the consistency of the materials being used, the consistency of the roof lines, as well as all the datum lines that are created by the soffits throughout the street walls. There's also a great articulation and language of the bay and windows and porches. There's a predominance of vertically oriented and expressed architecture. There's similar setbacks. And we see a predominance of gable roofs with a few localized mansard roofs, particularly on the more commercial streets, and a real wealth of ornamentation, both in the brickwork and in the woodwork. As Clint mentioned, we've had a number of community engagements from Cabbagetown Advisory Group meetings to meetings specifically with the BIA and the HCD committees, to as well a public-led, a public open house that we see the photo here, where the HCD plan was presented to the public and we were able to answer questions and get feedback and comments. The structure of the HCD plan follows the Ontario Heritage Act requirements. We start with providing a explanation of the district's significance, so the statement of cultural heritage values as well as the heritage attributes. There's a statement of objectives of why the area is being conserved and what we are conserving in the area. We then have a section which describes the values and the components or elements within it, so an understanding of the boundary, the building typologies, the styles, all the contributing and non-contributing properties, the character sub-areas and public realm, and I'll get into that in a second, as well as all the policies and guidelines for the implementation of the HCD. Our analysis of the HCD district included both an understanding of the architectural styles of the building, but also the building typologies. So it was sort of a double analysis of understanding the form, volumetric, and massing of these buildings and how they can be grouped and categorized, as well as looking at the decorative elements and architectural expression and detailing of the buildings. So we had this, this joint analysis to understand what was of value within the area and how it was categorized. The area, we developed 2 subcategory areas, recognizing the unique character of Dundas and Gerrard versus the residential character of the rest of the area. So we have that in the more commercial streets in orange and the residential streets in blue. The properties, the determination of whether they were contributing or non-contributing was based on whether the properties met the following criteria. 1, were they constructed during the periods of intensification and development within the area, so that they were part of that major push of building out and creation of the neighborhood during that type period at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. Were they one of the prevailing typologies in the area, such as Bay and Gable or Ontario Cottage? And did they actually have enough integrity and to actually merit and retain the characteristics that mark them and define them? And also, did they have contextual value? In an area where there was a lot of row houses and attached houses, did that building contribute to the identity of a larger block and a larger continuity of expression of the street wall? This is the mapping of the contributing properties. So you can see there's the predominance of the neighborhood, 82%, as Clint mentioned, are contributing properties. The development of the guidelines and the policies for contributing and non-contributing properties were then reviewed. So for contributing properties, our overarching guideline is effectively that we are conserving what makes the characteristics of the neighborhood and gives it its unique identity. So we're looking at the character of the roofs, the walls, the porches, windows, balconies, and the direction that's being provided is one founded in Downs conservation, and that is repairing and retaining what is already there. We encourage that restoration be based on documentation, that any new features or components have to be compatible with what is being added to the building. We recognize in their policies in the neighborhood, recognizing the push for densification. There was a whole discussion about adding basement properties and how basement entrances would be provided. So there's direction provided on that. There's direction on conserving roof elements and wall components, as well as the general size, feature orientation of openings and walls. In the residential areas, we also understand that part of densification includes having additions and alterations to the properties. And we looked at different studies as how one would do an addition, and understanding that the addition has to conserve the expression and character of the street wall. And that was particularly important in these areas where there is such a consistent datum line of the roof and the roof lines and the cornice lines, so that the addition, any addition, had to actually respect that articulation and character of the facades. So we're looking at articulations and additions that are added to the rear end of the property, and with an angular plane and a sight line, so that reduces their impact and their visibility from the street. On Gerrard and Dundas, which are larger lots, there are deeper lots, and they also have a more commercial and mixed use programming and zoning functions. In this case, the predominance or the strategy is to actually keep what we're calling the primary structure. So that's the first depth of the actual property, and to have the additions be behind that. So we're trying to keep really strong the 3D massing of the street wall and the buildings that on that street. The properties have enough depth to allow for more significant construction at their rear. And that in this case, we're less concerned about actually visibility from Gerrard and Dundas, and more about keeping the identity of the buildings that front those streets and understanding them from a 3D depth. So avoiding having the buildings being reduced to more of a facade and more of a just paper thick articulation. In all cases, additions have to be designed to be compatible with the character of the area and have to reflect and support the general character. For non-contributing properties, unlike contributing properties, demolition is possible, but we expect that if a demolition permit is being requested, that a new permit for construction has been already provided and approved before demolition will be allowed. New additions and new development are encouraged to look at the articulation and rhythm of the facades, so that the way they articulate and express their elevations is in keeping with the articulation of the street wall of the area. Looking at materials as well that are compatible with the area, and looking at conserving the height of the street wall. So really keeping in and building in and reinforcing the really strong street wall and street wall of the areas in the streets. As with any HCD, there's a number of deemed permits. So this is work that's permitted in the neighborhood for which there is no additional heritage permit that is required. This work is predominantly work that's maintenance. So if somebody is repairing their facades or their windows or porches or balustrades, and what they're doing is replacing or repairing in kind, so not actually altering the features in a way and reinstating what is there, they will not need any particular permits. Additions of eavesdrops, weatherproofing, maintenance and landscaping work, as long as it doesn't require changing of grade and excavation, as well as temporary lights and exterior lights. Those are all the things that would not actually require any special permitting to do. So it will allow people to maintain their properties easily. And that comes to the end of my presentation.
Heavily into unmuting today.
Correct.
No, what I was saying, and I said it to staff, is how beautifully your presentation visually explains what it is you're trying to do. I love the before and after photos, the streetscapes that show contributing and non-contributing. I think it's a beautiful presentation, and Clint is to be congratulated as well, and the rest of staff. There's almost 600 properties that you had to consider. And so congratulations. Are there questions for Dima first and then Clint? Elizabeth?
I just want to echo what you said, Sandra, and expand on one thing in particular, and that is, so it's not a question, it's a comment, is that I think the clarity of the presentation and the diagrams lead to a very good understanding of how one deals with an HCD, what can be permitted and what can't be permitted. And I think that that's important because the general public needs to know, the property owners need to know, the community needs to know how, you know, what any restrictions are, but most importantly, what is not restricted and how you can deal with these buildings, address retaining the features of the building and still proceed with intensification and so on. So I want to compliment you on that. I think it was really clear, and it's one of the clearer presentations of this type that I've seen. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you. I should add, we did not have it in our presentation, but we also integrated into these HCD best practices to give people ideas and information as to how they would actually maintain their homes.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments for Dima? And we might as well add Clint at this point. Okay, seeing none. Any discussion amongst us? Seeing none, I have a beautiful report before me. There's one comment I do want to make that really hit me. One of the very first people I met when I started to become involved in the heritage field was Peggy Curtin. And Peggy is the person who advocated so vigorously for the preservation of Cabbagetown after Riverdale Zoo left and they turned it into Riverdale Farm. And one of the ways they preserved the neighborhood by doing that was you could not have residences of a certain density close to the farm animals. So I've always been teased in our own neighborhood that what am I really advocating for? Is it a new zoo? Is it a new farm? What is it you're trying to do? But Peggy was so committed, and it's lovely to see the generations of people since Peggy who have worked so diligently to save this neighborhood and its heritage, but in a way, I mean, you have St. Jamestown, which is the most dense area in Toronto in the middle of Cabbagetown. You have the new development along, it's still Bloor. No, it's not. It's just at the cusp of Bloor and Danforth. It's not exactly impossible to intensify in Cabbagetown, but still retain its character. And so all of that said, would someone like to make a motion to adopt this report? Barbara, all in favor? Thank you very much, everybody. So this concludes this meeting, at which point
Can I, Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I may interrupt you for the last time. On behalf of city staff, thank you so much for your exceptional service to the City of Toronto, your leadership in the board, your activism in every part of this city and especially your home area. We look forward to working with you further, and I just wanted to say that staff really appreciate all that you've done with and for this board and for the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. And so now you get to deal with Julia moving forward I am passing the baton or whatever into the very capable hands of Julia Rady Shaw. I hope I will be seeing all of you in various other capacities going forward. So take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.